Hey everybody, and thanks for checking out the second video of the shoe rack. This is part 2. There's actually going to be 3 parts. And because my son is ridiculously cute, I'm leaving some spots in here blank so he can communicate. Yeah, well, they're not for the tires, buddy. No, they're not actually going to be ladders. They're just... It's how they appear right now. So, I did this video differently, and I really appreciate any feedback people would have to offer. I pretty much removed any time-lapsing. Cleaning it up. Why? I don't see it up. Because it's got to take glue. Yeah, I got to glue it. You got to glue it? To another piece, yeah. To another piece? Yep. You got to glue it to another piece? Yeah. It's my future woodworker right there. And singer. Okay, so anyway, this is a completely different video than I normally do. I basically eliminated time-lapsing, and I do have a little bit of it where I'm like planing, just because I don't think anybody wants to listen to the planer run. So I shortened that up and cut the audio out. But I thought I had a fair bit of footage on this video that didn't involve my 6 children carrying on like crazy, which is normally my big battle. I do not have a wood shop right now. I'm working in the schoolhouse, using it as a shop, so it's pretty rambunctious sometimes, and just really hard to get a good, clear, quiet recording when I'm working on something. So anyway, back to the shoe rack. What I'm working on here are the shelves. So there are 8 shelves on the shoe rack, and I made them out of 2x6 for larch construction grade lumber from a local building supply. I tried to source some fairly straight grain stuff and edged it all. Again, my joiner is not currently operable, so I had to hand joint everything with hand planes, and here I'm gluing it up. And so I glued up 8 shelves, and what I've actually done here is I was able to do it with 2 boards using the construction grade lumber. I was able to get an 11-inch shelf out of 2 2x6s, and so you can see here every other board is glued to the other one, which gives me, instead of to utilize my clamps to glue more up with less, I'm gluing up 3 panels at a time, or 2 panels in this case, using 1 set of clamps. So again, I really would appreciate any feedback anybody has to offer about the way I've constructed this video. I personally enjoy watching other woodworkers do their handwork. Even though I do it myself, I still enjoy watching other people work with their hands. So if that's the same for other people and you're watching this and you just, you appreciate the sounds of what's happening, then please do let me know. I actually prefer to do the video like this. Sometimes I feel the need to get as much footage displayed as possible because I record from start to finish, so I have hundreds of gigabytes of footage on a project like this to sort through to make the video. So anyway, these are the shelves, and the shelves are 3 tenons, which come through the rails on the side rails that you had seen in the previous video get made. And so what I'm doing here is spacing them, and I didn't have a particular science. I chose to set the outside tenons about 1 inch off the edge. I believe they're 2.5 inches wide, and then I centered the last tenon between those. and that whatever that was, that was how I chose to do it. So I'm squaring these, squaring everything around, and gonna use a marking gauge and mark the end grain as my reference for hand tooling. And I'm just marking my cut marks here for the shelf tenons. And I'm only gonna show, again, due to the way I'm doing this video, I'm gonna really just show me working on a couple of shelves, but I had 8 of these in total. Each shelf has 3 tenons on each side, which is 6 per shelf, which means I had 48 shelves, tenons to cut on these shelves. So it was a tremendous amount of time went into making these. So I think I mentioned it in the last video, but this is one of the classrooms. You can see the chalkboard back there in the schoolhouse that we bought, and you can see the framed walls. And I actually built the shoe rack while I was waiting on the spray foam insulation specialist to come out and blow or spray the foam into the walls in the schoolhouse, and I was kind of stuck on the construction. So I kind of had a break to work on this, and this is something I wanted to make for my wife, so went ahead and got it done. Alright, so I've already run the marking gauge around and I've scored my line. And what I'm doing now is I'm just taking my circular saw and just hogging out the bulk of the meat so I can chisel out, 95% of the waste quickly. And then I'll pare down those tenons. So having used the marking gauge, I'm just being very careful with the saw, and I left myself, from a 16th to a 32nd proud of the line, so I can come back and I can chisel that out for a nice perfect joint where that shelf will meet the rails. And again, I had 8 shelves, 2 sides each, 16 of these to do. So here's the marking gauge. I'm marking that end grain, and I'm going to use that end grain reference mark that I'm plowing in right now. That's how I'm going to guide myself to get these tenons to pretty much almost all be identical. And as I said, this is for larch lumber, construction grade lumber. It really is not suited to this. It was, it's very brittle. It's very easy to chip, but it was available, and because it's already shaped, as lumber in at least a rough format, because I'm down a joiner right now, I did not want to have to hand surface and dress my lumber with hand tools for this project size. It was already a lot of work to build this, so it was worth doing with the larch for lumber. So I was pretty happy with the end result regardless. So I'm just knocking a chamfer down from my marking gauge line, so I have that perfect scored reference line. And what I'm doing here is I'm just knocking down my my high points. And if you're new to woodworking and you're learning, this is to prevent your chisel. If you tried to just jam your chisel down in there and cut that line, the pressure of the wood squeezing against your chisel as you ram that bevel down, it's going to push your chisel into your wood, and it's going to create dents so that you will not have a nice smooth straight line. So you want to remove as much of that material as possible. And if you chip it away at a 45, you free yourself up completely to do that, to pare down like I'm doing right now and get a perfectly clean, straight cut without forcing the chisel into the material and causing nicks and things that you'll see on the finished product. And you can see this shelf is a little bit bowed. I wasn't too worried about them if they were bowed, because the tenons are going to straighten them out when I put them in the piece. It is construction grade lumber, and not having a joiner, I didn't spend a lot of time overly flattening them, so there was some warpage, but I knew that wouldn't be a big deal when it was done, so I just dealt with it. So this is an old Stanley Carriage Maker's rabbiting plane, one of my favorites, and very handy for this. You can take off a nice aggressive pass for something like this, and it's a bevel up plane. I'm sorry, a bevel down plane, just like a number 4 smoothing plane. So cutting across the end grain like this, it's actually it's very good. It won't rake out your tenons and chip it up a lot. So I'd rough it out with the Carriage Maker's plane, and then I would use the this is my Lee Nielsen rabbiting block plane, and I use that just to clean it up. I have it set to a much finer cut, and also if there was any warpage in the shelves, the smaller plane can deal with that and get me down to those end grain marks that I've made with the marking gauge. The knots in this larch made it really hard sometimes. It's even with the sharpest blades, it's hard to grab those resin heavy knots sometimes and get them. So I would say it was probably one of the hardest things about the project as far as woodworking, handworking went, was just dealing with these knots when I ran into them. So this is how I chose to take out my tenon waste. And you could do this with a coping saw, you could do this with a jigsaw, you could do this with like a drill, a drill and a saw. But I do dovetails this way, so I just instinctively chose to do it this way. You come from both sides, everything comes out real clean, and it doesn't take that long. So it's hard when you're filming to I'm constantly trying to be cognitive of where the camera is and making sure I'm not standing in front of it or sticking my big head in front of it. I've gotten much better at it over time. So even still, you can hear my kids in the background there. They're actually downstairs, but they're a noisy bunch. So I'm cutting the cheeks off here, and in case you're wondering why I chose to leave the cheeks on. So I started out taking the cheeks off in the beginning, so I had less to plane. But I realized by leaving the cheeks on there, when you're planing cross grain, it prevents you tearing out your tenons. My tenons are all exposed, so it was really important to me that the end grain of the tenons was pristine. So by leaving those cheeks on there, while I worked the tenons into shape, made a lot of sense and worked out really well because it allowed me to keep those tenon ends real clean, real pretty for the finished work, for the finished view that you're going to see, because everything is exposed. All the tenons on this piece are exposed. So here I'm just squaring up and cleaning up the tenons, making sure everything is 90 degrees. So here's the assembly of the, the marking of the frame. So I had already, you saw the frame rails in the prior video, very carefully noting front, back, which pieces they were. I marked my tenons for each shelf just in case there was a slight difference, so the shelves were matched up to the rail that they were going to be going through. And I marked the tenons on the top. I could square those down, and then go to the drill press and begin hogging out each rail for the 3 tenons that are going into it, and that's what I'm doing here. And I think I had mentioned in the prior video, but unfortunately, I had to do everything with the drill press like this, and I ended up picking up a hollow chisel mortiser after I was done with this project. So it would have been really nice if I had picked it up prior, but as life would see it, I did not happen to come across it until after I was done with this shelf. So I'm just cleaning out my bore holes and square chiseling everything out and getting my mortises all set. So these mortises are actually 7/16 of an inch wide, which I regret. I wish I had actually made them 1/2 an inch. Because I made them 7/16, I actually do not own a 7/16 or 3/8 inch chisel, so I did have to pair everything out with a 1/4 inch chisel, and I have the old marbles. At some point I'm going to order a Lee Nielsen, a couple of Lee Nielsen chisels, and use those. I have the old Stanley 750s here. Those are my go-to chisels. But I'd like to try out a Lee Nielsen and see how the steel edge holds versus these old Stanley 750s. And a lot of time went into this, cleaning these up for the tenons. I didn't want to force it. It is for larch lumber, so it is prone to split if you're not careful. So made sure everything was just fit nice and smooth, and paid close attention. Made sure I wasn't over tightening anything to cause any splitting. And that's that. So the third video will be the completion, and thanks for watching. Hit the like button and subscribe.